Good morning, Hertfordshire, and welcome to the Hertfordshire Forward Conference 2020. My name's Toby Fox, and I'm your facilitator for a day of discussions about recovery and partnership. Well, I say a day, it's actually for the next hour and a half, and I hope that doesn't end up feeling like a whole day for you. There will be two further 1.5 hour sessions on the 21st of October on sustainability and sustainable recovery, and the 26th of November on diversity and equality. And those are in place of the traditional half-day Hertfordshire Forward event. Now, it's a sad consequence of COVID-19, among many others, that we can't all be together networking and catching up with colleagues and friends. But I hope it's of some advantage to you to not use up a whole day in one go for this event. And of course, you'll be able to view on demand the recording of any sessions if you're unable to watch right through live. How very modern we are in Hertfordshire. I say that in jest, but in reality you are right at the cutting edge here in Hertfordshire. I'm lucky enough to work with dozens of local authorities across a number of regions. And in my experience, this county is setting standards in collaboration. But first, let's set the scene. Let's try to understand what we've been through. Let's shine a light on the good, on examples of where we've worked well in partnership and what that's taught us about our organisations and our communities. And let's look ahead a bit at our goals and our priorities. And who else would we ask to take that task on? What pair of hands could be safer to turn to than those of the engaging, the incisive, the energetic, the downright positive leader of Hertfordshire County Council, Councillor David Williams. David.
Toby, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And I have to say, I woke up this morning and I really felt with a heavy heart, and this is probably the first time this has happened during this pandemic, that I missed the thought of being at our conference and having the opportunity to meet people and have a good breakfast, have a good lunch. And that's the first time that I've really felt that, because I've been quite comfortable working from home and making a few journeys to County Hall. But it would have been good to have been in Hatfield this morning. Anyway, Hertfordshire Forward is recognised throughout the county as a valuable forum to ensure all partners are aware of the issues of the day and to have their voices heard. Please do take part this morning, answering the questions posed by our speakers and putting questions to us as Toby has outlined. We will all have had a variety of experiences this year, both in our personal lives and professionally. But for this webinar, the focus is on what we need to do now to put Hertfordshire back on a positive trajectory of recovery. But first, I want to update you on what has happened in Hertfordshire in recent weeks in relation to coronavirus and how we have met those challenges. The infection rate remains a concern in parts of Hertfordshire. Toby, can I trouble you to put up one of the slides, please? The first of the slides on the transmission rate. Through August until last week, the principal issue has been social and household transmission. I've got charts here, and this is the first of those, of the cases per 100,000 people over the previous 7 days. Now, if you recall, this is the measure that was driving Airbridge decisions. 20 cases per 100,000 was seen as a threshold for quarantining travellers. And then this is the chart for Hertfordshire as a whole. It peaked at 24 cases per 100,000 people on the 16th of September. Most recently, as of yesterday, it's at 16.1. In essence, the vast majority of Hertfordshire residents have been playing their part, adhering to the guidance to help us all stay safe and doing our county proud. The next chart is Decoran's chart. Currently low at 7.1, but peaked at 25.9 on the 27th of August. This was driven by A-level students at one school socialising post-A-level results. It led to some behavioural learnings. Many of the pupils were less than frank about where they'd been and who they'd been with when they were contacted by contact tracers. But nevertheless, they were online using social media, keeping their friends and colleagues updated. If we can go on, Toby, to Hertfordshire. Hertfordshire is now at 24.9, but peaked at 63.3 on the 5th of September. We agreed with the Joint Biosecurity Centre and Public Health England that the borough would go on to Public Health England's watch list as an area of concern. Again, sixth formers at one school were the genesis as it spread socially through circles of friends to pupils in other districts and in North London, as well as their families and including some primary school children as well. In response, there was a huge local track and trace effort and some strong communications. Councillors and the fire service were out and about in Boreham Wood and Radlett, and council leader Maurice Bright was on both national and regional television. And then the final of these slides is Broxbourne, currently at 33, but it peaked at 41.3 on the 19th of September. But this position reflects a change in transmission. Infection has torn through a care home with a number of residents and staff testing positive, but significantly, none of the positive residents are currently symptomatic. So our efforts to tackle the pandemic can be characterized as the term used by the Prime Minister, whack-a-mole, and they have been terrific. County Council, district and health colleagues working with Public Health England, NHS Test and Trace, regional NHS colleagues, and the Joint Biosecurity Centre. And all of that led to focused engagement with the parents of school pupils, schools, businesses, licensees, care homes, and importantly, faith leaders in Watford and Hertfordshire. However, witnessing these outbreaks so closely highlights just how infectious the virus is, ripping through circles of friends, families, care home staff, and care home residents. We must all recognise that with rising case numbers, the national picture is on a knife edge. So thanks for those slides, Toby. More widely across Hertfordshire, we continue to urge everyone to play your part and follow the simple measures to prevent the spread of the virus. Wash your hands as often as possible with soap and warm water, or use a sanitizer. Keep socially distant from others, particularly indoors. Wear a face covering when required to, or it's difficult to stay socially distant. And if you have symptoms, self-isolate and book a test. As I said, we've seen outstanding partnership working, navigating the situation and guiding our residents through this difficult time. The response has been a real team effort by everyone in Hertfordshire, involving health, police, local government, voluntary sector, and many more. Over 110,000 food parcels and nearly 2,500 prescriptions were delivered to those who could not leave their homes because severe health conditions made them most vulnerable to the virus. In addition, over 11,000 food parcels were delivered to organisations such as food banks, charities, and the district councils. All of this was a partnership effort. We saw over 10,000 people respond to calls for volunteers, with nearly 6,000 deployed to deliver support in the community. We know of many mutual aid groups, food banks, good neighbour schemes that were established or stepped up to assist those struggling with these most unusual circumstances. This county would not have been able to respond to this crisis without such a dedicated voluntary sector. Plans are now underway to ensure that we can build on this legacy of new volunteers and enhance partnership working, and we'll hear more from Simon about this later this morning. Agencies from across the county have worked together to put in place actions to help those affected by the crisis. Hertfordshire Community Foundation have been commissioned to deliver and host an online crowdfunding platform to help fund community projects in Hertfordshire. Crowdfund Hertfordshire went live at the end of May and provides access to a range of local funds for voluntary and charitable groups. Communities across Hertfordshire have shown resilience and adaptability, but the pandemic has also shone a light on where there are inequalities. For those of us with the right technology, good broadband connections, and digital skills, we've been able to maintain some semblance of normality. The pandemic has thrown into sharp definition the issue of digital exclusion, which has been a reality for some of the population who lack basic skills, equipment, and internet access. The percentage of new safeguarding concerns where there is domestic abuse cited rose significantly during lockdown. Despite recent falls, the July figure still shows a 50% increase on that recorded at the same time last year. The reporting of mental health referrals for adults and children and young people has been disrupted, but anecdotal evidence is that the underlying service demand is high. Volumes are expected to return to and possibly exceed previous levels. And then with so many children not attending schools since March, children's services are expecting a surge of referrals. I want to turn to our economy. The implications of the pandemic for our economy and employment are grave. In 2018, the gross value added across the Hertfordshire economy was £40.7 billion, one of the largest in England. We're forecasting that it will shrink to £35 billion this year. This loss of GVA from March until the year end will be the equivalent to either Hertfordshire's entire manufacturing sector or our whole construction sector being chopped out of our economy. In employment terms, including self-employment, the inference is a loss of 80 to 100,000 jobs this year. And it could be more, depending on how the job retention scheme, or furlough as it's known, concludes and what other national measures are put in place to support businesses. 173,400 employments have been furloughed, a take-up of 30%. Claimant unemployment rates have increased rapidly. Hertfordshire's claimant count was 39,010 in August 2020, compared with 12,980 in August 2019, almost double the level seen at the height of the financial crisis and close to those in the early 1990s. Broxbourne and Watford had the highest number of claimants as a proportion of residents in August at 6.9%. The biggest year-on-year change, 279%, was seen in East Hertfordshire. Some areas and some workers are disproportionately affected. 25% of Watford's workforce can work from home, but only 21% of Broxbourne's. Broxbourne is relatively more exposed to jobs in retail, hospitality, and manufacturing, while Watford has relatively more professional, scientific, and technical jobs. Workers who are from a BAME background, women, young workers, low-paid workers, and disabled workers are also affected disproportionately. We'll be hearing from Anna Morrison later this morning about how we can support young workers and encourage the class of 2020. Importantly, the Hertfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership has recently published its economic recovery plan in response to COVID-19, and it's called Unlocking Hertfordshire. The plan includes detailed analysis and builds on the emergency measures which were taken at both local and national level. It charts a route through the economic effects of the pandemic and defines the actions in response. It aims to accelerate recovery over the next 6 to 18 months, but it will also position Hertfordshire for sustainable and good growth going forward. Hertfordshire LEP's board, on which both Linda and I sit, will oversee the delivery of the plan. And for those who wish to know more, you may want to join the LEP's webinar and AGM this Friday. Given the uncertainty of the situation and the process of EU transition, the plan is and will remain a live one. In conclusion, our communities have shown trust in us as local leaders, and there is mostly a willingness to comply to the rules and guidance rather than enforcement being required. We continue to work hard reassuring our communities, and Linda will be speaking about her role as chair of the Community Reassurance Cell and the impact on our communities, particularly those who may be adversely impacted by coronavirus. Thank you for the roles that you have all played over the last 6 months, and thank you for joining us this morning. Toby.
Thank you very much indeed, David. Thanks for setting the scene so concisely and clearly. Now, viewers, you may disagree. You may wish to question David on some of his findings, his predictions. I'm here to encourage you to do just that by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens to type in questions and vote for other people's questions so that we can put the most popular queries to our panel later on in the session today. You might be enthused by David and our other panelists today, inspired with ideas and insights into how we can work together towards recovery. And the first step in partnership working is sharing ideas, so share yours. Please type your thoughts into the chat function at the bottom of your screens and share those with other viewers so that we can have a discussion going on about which ones to take forward, and read and comment on other people's ideas. All of this material will fuel our conversation later and be reported back to you and your organisations after the webinar. And finally, we're going to be running some snap polls as well through the remainder of the webinar, canvassing your opinion and reaction to our panelists' findings. You can respond to these and influence the conversation here with a simple click of the mouse when they appear. Now, you're poised to engage. You just need some stimulation, right? So let's ask Linda to provide just that with her take on what community reassurance is and why we need it.
Thank you, Toby, and thank you for everyone for giving up your time to come and see us. So on the first slide, please, Toby. So the Community Reassurance Cell, and I think I'm willing to offer a prize to anyone who can come up with during this seminar on something more snappy, was set up in May, and it's part and parcel of the Hertfordshire Local Resilience Forum. It was set up to, as it says on the tin, to provide long-term community reassurance that we can get through COVID and how we can help our residents to get there. So it consists of representatives from the district and borough councils that you see on your screen, and including the portfolio holder for health and public health and prevention from the county council. So we are broadly spread across the county. And as you would expect in this situation, we are politically neutral, but all parties are represented at the group. So we work very closely with the officers from county council and our districts, and we have been provided most extraordinary support from the public health department at county council and the policy department at county council. So as I said, we started meeting in May. We started with meeting once a week, and then we moved into, at the moment, we meet fortnightly. It's basically so that we can keep the momentum going. And I do see that this Community Reassurance Cell, in fact, has a very long-term job. And I think it will still be in existence in one way or another, right the way through for another 18 months to 2 years. Next slide, please, Toby. So a couple of comments on what we've achieved so far. You'll notice there are two pictures, one of me and one of David and me. The fact that they are both outside or within alcoholic establishments is just purely chance, really. So the bottom one, we're standing outside a very good wine shop in Hertford, which I'm very happy to promote, when the shop started to open. And the one above was when the hospitality industry opened, and we were entertained at McMullen's Brewery. Other than that, there is no relationship between David and I and alcohol whatsoever. What we wanted to do though, and I will come to the Travel with Confidence scheme closer to the end. What we did with the community impact assessment, we wanted to see what the community and the community groups needed us to do. We are there to make sure that those who may fall through the net do not fall through the net, and we are there to assist. We don't have any direct money, but sometimes we can squeeze a little bit out of somebody to get something done. Next slide, please, Toby. So we sent out a very detailed questionnaire to community groups and associations across Hertfordshire. I think in the end we had about some 500, and we asked them how they would expect and what they would need from us and what the impact on COVID is in the short term, the medium term and the longer term. And we had some 120 replies. We also used a lot of social media, we used counsellors, and it was, we wrote to anybody who we thought would be willing to listen, and even those who weren't really. So we contacted people right the way through from the Lord Lieutenant, the Scouts, domestic abuse charities, community charities, voluntary areas, faith groups, BAM groups. So it was very much a let's see what's out there and let's get the results back. And as I said, we had 120 replies, and the first analysis of that was discussed in detail yesterday, and I will come on to in a minute. Next slide, please, Toby. So we asked them under the 7 broad headings, which were here. We also used it as an opportunity to test out the economic impact on businesses, because one of the other aspects of recovery is the economic and business side, which David has already mentioned. And we thought they'd all rather have one questionnaire rather than 2. So we are working very closely with our economic recovery impact as they exist at the moment. Next slide, please, Toby. So these are the main findings that we've had so far. Now, as you would expect, 73% of it came back on humanitarian issues. This is a very broad area, and again, a lot of it is cross-cutting. So we need to make sure that we do tie up the 2-dimensional aspect of what a lot of people are saying to us. So we are looking at mental health, isolation and unemployment. At each of our seminars, each of our group meetings once a fortnight, we have someone come to talk to us. So we have had young people come to talk to us, faith groups. We've had the financial unit from County Council come to talk to us about economic and poverty. And it again, it's what we're saying to them is, you know, give us 1 or 2 things that you think we could actually really make a difference on. And I think we've been very privileged to actually have people come and spend time with us to actually talk through what they are seeing at the coalface with their communities. Next slide, please, Toby. So yesterday, we actually had a more detailed analysis of these 120 replies, looking at the main areas which were expressed. The 3 areas that because we want to focus on those which are most important at the moment. So there's mental health, financial hardship, and working with the BAME communities have come out as the 3 that we will be focusing on at the moment. We're also going to be looking at older people and in particular isolation, particularly if we are going to have to experience a degree or of 1 degree or another in terms of the lockdown or social isolation. So we will be talking to U3A, Age Concern, the Hills, just to see what else we can be doing. And it's often getting the messages over. So one of the officers who sits on our group leads on the communications across the county. But perhaps this is something that we can ask from help from you as well, because as someone has mentioned, a lot of the volunteers actually are in the age group of those who have to socially isolate. So we are very keen to look at the volunteers who did come forward on the initial round to make sure that we have something that they will want to do and become involved with. So I said I'd come back to safe transport. One of the very early projects we took on was related to taxi drivers. Now, I'm sure you'll realise that a lot of the taxi drivers within the county come from the BAME community. Often they're not local, some of them come from Luton or elsewhere around the county. And we wanted to make sure that they understood how they should be making sure that they're safe, but also how they can make their taxis safe for our residents to get into, and that our residents had the confidence that they could get into these taxis and know that they would be, that all procedures were in place to make them safe for them. I mean, I think one of the mantras for anyone who's involved in taxi licensing is, would you put your frail old mother in the back of a taxi with this taxi driver? And if the answer has to be, oh, I'm not sure about that, then she should not be given a taxi license. And we wanted to give that reassurance to communities. So we have started to run training courses. We have a relationship with County Council. All districts and boroughs have signed up to it. We've had a little bit of money to help put in screens. And as I sit here in my office, next door, there is in fact a training course going on, which is being run by the licensing officer from East Herts, as well as the licensing officer from Watford. And once they have this accreditation, they can advertise it. So we know that they will, anyone who applies or uses one of those taxis will know that these people have been trained in understanding what needs to go on. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot that's changing. We have to be very fluid as to what we're looking at and how we're doing it. But I think we would welcome any input from any of you who are again able to say, yeah, but you haven't thought about this, you haven't thought about that. How can we help to get our residents safely out again? Thank you.
That's fantastic, Linda. Thank you very much indeed. And with David's predictions of perhaps 100,000 jobs being lost, I can see exactly why you're predicting that communities are going to need your reassurance cell for a good 12 to 18 months, if not for longer. So it's really, really valuable work being done. Viewers, thank you for your chat. We're getting lots of questions coming in both on the chat and through the Q&A, and some ideas coming through there. Do feel free to scroll through and read them and respond with your own thoughts and ideas. And while you're doing that, we're going to turn to our next panelist. And Anna Morrison, CBE, and her class of 2020. Anna's going to explain a little bit about how some of the young people are being affected by the coronavirus, as Linda's already attested to, and some fantastic work that's being done on their behalf. Anna, I'll hand over to you as I find your slides for you.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. It's so brilliant to be here amongst you all, and thank you, Linda. That was really fascinating to hear about that amount of work that's happening in the community. I am I'm kind of Hertfordshire born and bred. So I went to school in Hertfordshire. I'm a product of the Hertfordshire education system. I now live in Hertfordshire, have my family here, and I also now have a business here. So I have benefited from the very many opportunities that Hertfordshire offers its residents. And when I was at school, I didn't want to go to university. I was one of those young people who said, don't want to go, what else can I do? And unfortunately, all that time ago, and it was a long time ago, over 20 years ago, there wasn't a great deal of support. And unfortunately, unless you were going to university, you were kind of frowned upon. That's how I felt anyway. I certainly was told that I would never get anywhere in life, never achieve anything, and would struggle to be taken seriously if I didn't have a degree. I often reflect on that and smile, because for anyone who has met me and knows my personality, I need little more motivation than to be told that I can't do something. And that's all I need to want to prove people wrong. So the reason I'm telling you that is because that is the background to Amazing Apprenticeships. So it was because of that probably misfortunate experience that I had when I was 18 that has enabled me to now build a business that employs people in Hertfordshire, that works nationally and internationally to change the dialogue around apprenticeships. We work tirelessly with schools across the country. We work with over 4,000 schools and colleges. And through that, we engage teachers, careers advisors, parents, carers, young people, stakeholders, basically anyone that I can get to listen, to talk to them about apprenticeships, the power of apprenticeships, the benefits that they can bring people, and what else we need to do to make the system better, to reach more people. And that's why I'm so keen today to talk to you about Class of 2020. Obviously, apprenticeships are one of my big passions, but my other big passion is social mobility. And that probably comes from having a grandmother who once set up a homeless charity in Letchworth to serve the local community and the homeless individuals that were in Letchworth and the surrounding areas, a father who was in Hertfordshire County Council Social Services and spent years working there, and a mum who was a head teacher of a primary school. And all of that has come from Hertfordshire, and I think that is probably why I'm so passionate, not only about doing it nationally, but I really care about our community in Hertfordshire and making a difference. So next slide, please. I'd like to start by setting the scene. So when we talk about Class of 2020, and it's been used a lot in the media, you know, it's one of those kind of regular phrases that we see. What I mean by Class of 2020 today is our education leavers, so our young people who were leaving school and college this summer. I also mean our apprentices, so if you could keep clicking for me, that will bring up a few images. And those are the two groups that I'm going to focus on today. Keep clicking, sorry, I've put all that animation in. 2 more clicks. Just to give it a bit of context, and obviously David has set out the huge challenge that we've got ahead of ourselves, and I'm involved in lots of different groups in Hertfordshire already looking at this and trying to put our apprenticeship plans in place and trying to work out what we might need to do with businesses and individuals. But there's some national data I wanted to share with you. So the Office for National Statistics put some stats out just last week showing that nearly 1 in 7 18 to 24-year-olds are now claiming benefits. And that is a picture that we're seeing in Hertfordshire as well. This is not unique to every other area in England and not us. This is something that we are going to struggle with in Hertfordshire. And nationally, we know that more than 1 million young people are likely to become NEET, so not in education, employment or training. And so we've got a big challenge on our hands. If you could click the next button for me, please. There was a report out this week, which hopefully many of you will have seen, that was driven by something called the Youth Employment Group. And the Youth Employment Group was something I was invited to join about 5 months ago, bringing together 150 vocal, passionate, disruptive individuals, a bit like myself, to say, what are we going to do? We've got this challenge coming and we know it's coming. What are we going to be saying to government and what can we try and influence and affect? They are now saying that nationally we need 1,000 opportunities per day to be created for us to be able to recover and get more young people back into employment, or opportunities that will be stepping stones towards employment, so that our Class of 2020 do not become completely disengaged. I hate the phrase lost generation, and I'm very confident that in Hertfordshire we won't let it happen, but we've got a lot of work to do that we're going to need to put in place to make sure that it doesn't happen. So next slide, please. So first of all, looking at education leavers. Obviously, our education leavers, when the pandemic hit, were completely confused about their options. We had young people who had applied to university and had been made offers, conditional, unconditional. We had young people who were in the throes of applying for apprenticeships, perhaps had been made a job offer and weren't sure if it was going to actually materialise, or hadn't quite got round yet to applying for apprenticeships, and suddenly the apprenticeship vacancies fell off a cliff, to coin a phrase from the government. So we knew that we were dealing with some very confused young people. We also knew that some of that support that normally would have been in place for them face to face with our brilliant kind of careers service and, you know, individuals that will support those young people, it all changed. And so those young people have had to make decisions about their futures without having the typical support structures that we would have ensured were in place around them. As a result, some of them are going to change their minds. So I'm involved in what's called a NEET participation group for Hertfordshire. I work closely with Herts County Council on this, and we're very mindful that we're going to see a kind of a bumpy road on this one. At the moment, things might start to look a bit more positive. We know lots of young people are perhaps choosing to stay on at school sixth form, going to college, going to university. But because they may have made some of those choices without that information around them, some of them are naturally going to change their minds. We saw that happen in 2008, 2009. We're likely to see it again. Next click, please. So if they're looking to get into work, they're going to be entering a very competitive labour market. We know there are going to be less jobs. We know there's going to be more competition for those jobs. And we know that our young people who are going to be trying to secure those jobs are going to have less experience potentially than other people that they're going to be competing with. Next click, please. And we are already seeing a disproportionate impact for vulnerable young people. And when I say vulnerable young people, I mean the entire breadth of our vulnerable young people. We have individuals with learning difficulties and disabilities we're already seeing those NEET statistics go up for that group. We have care leavers, we have young people with criminal records, ex-offenders, and underneath all of this, if you could click the next one for me, we have significant mental health and well-being issues that are starting to emerge. And that's not a straight line. As anyone who knows anyone or has experienced mental ill health themselves, you will know that that will go up and down. And so our service providers, our training providers, our employers have got to be mindful of all of those considerations and the issues that this group are dealing with. And I haven't even mentioned the fiasco around the exam results, but of course that is all going to compound into this picture as well. Next slide, please. Looking at our apprentices, I wanted to let you know what had happened with our apprentices really. So again, I work with a group of providers. We're tracking this really carefully. So some of our apprentices remained at work. My apprentices in my business, fully employed, working the whole way through, albeit from home. Some of our apprentices were furloughed. We probably saw for Hertfordshire at its peak around 60 to 70% of our apprentices being furloughed. The vast majority of them were able to continue learning, but as David pointed out earlier, there were significant digital inequalities. Apprentices did not receive any support from the government in terms of digital equipment or access to IT, Wi-Fi. You know, we had probably over 30% of young people living in mobile-only households with no access to a laptop or a digital device to be able to complete their learning. I don't know what you're like, but my attention span on my phone is only so long. I can't do an awful lot on a tiny screen. So obviously that did have an impact. Some of our apprentices experienced a break in learning if they were furloughed as well, and very few numbers of redundancies at the moment, very, very small numbers, although obviously as the job retention scheme comes to an end, we're keeping a really close eye on that. So our furloughed learners are probably down to about 10 to 15% in the county now. It's quite low, and that's based on data that's coming back from training providers. So underneath all of this, we've got the digital inequalities, we've got the mixed digital skills to be able to navigate that remote learning, and then we've got their mental health and well-being, and of course their motivation to continue studies. For training providers, you know, if people were furloughed, it was when we had good weather in the summer, you know, there were quite a lot of distractions going on for people, not least everything that we were dealing with the pandemic as well. So priority number one, if you could click for me, please, is to support any redundancies who are going to be facing, apprentices facing redundancy. So we're locally, there will be a huge amount of work going on with providers who will try to transfer any redundant apprentices to an alternative employer. So that will always be number one. We've got to try and keep them in employment. On top of that, there's a national programme called the Redundancy Support Service for Apprentices, RESA, and they are also working nationally with employers to try and identify job opportunities that could be suitable for a part-completed apprentice to transfer into. Then our next piece of work is going to be around encouraging employers to create new vacancies. We've got to stimulate the market. We've got to try and look at where those opportunities could be and help employers to take advantage of the range of initiatives and incentives that the government have put in place. But we then need our pipeline of young people to be applying for those opportunities. Not only have we got to work with young people, we need to engage teachers and parents as key influencers to have confidence that there are vacancies there that those young people could be applying for and supporting them to apply for them. We've got to try and maintain confidence levels without raising false expectation. So what can we do? I've got 4 asks for you today. So if you could click the first one, please. Utilise your position to influence and raise awareness. So please, I think today, if you could think about your reach to residents, businesses and other key stakeholders, are you bringing them together? Do you have newsletters, publications? Is there anything that you could do to try and get the dialogue around Hertfordshire young people into people's minds and thinking about what they could do? Second, please. Leverage opportunities through your work. So there are always opportunities. If you are procuring new services, or even if you've already procured them, perhaps you could go back to that supply chain and say, right, what are you going to do for our Hertfordshire young people? Within your own organisations, I mean, the Department for Education just a couple of weeks ago made a quite bold statement that any junior positions would be considered for apprenticeships. A lot of our public services have been doing that for years, and that's brilliant. What else can we do? How can we influence that through your supply chains and your networks? Be mindful of the expectations of Hertfordshire young people. There is an immediate issue, of course, but we also need to offer them a long-term career progression opportunity as well. We have Hertfordshire young people needing a range of levels. We have some young people who will need something at intermediate level, at level 2, so a kind of real entry point into the workforce. We also have some very, very capable young people with very high aspirations. You know, they might not want to go to university, but that doesn't mean that they can't be brilliant workers and be supported into a higher or a degree apprenticeship opportunity. So let's not have a race to the bottom. I hate the national minimum wage for apprentices, and I don't mind saying it. Luckily, a lot of our Hertfordshire businesses pay much better than the national minimum wage for apprentices, but we want good opportunities to come through. We don't want to damage the credibility of apprenticeships and the reputation that it's built up in Hertfordshire. We want them to be really good quality, so kind of thinking to the future as well. And number 4, amplify the Hertfordshire campaign. So working with Hertfordshire LEP and Herts County Council, we're going to be launching a Hertfordshire campaign. It's going to last 12 months. It's not going to be a flash in the pan. We're going to keep badgering people to try and make sure that the conversation continues. So if there's any way that you want to join up with us, newsletters, blogs, content for websites, anything at all, please do get in touch, and I've put my contact details on the next slide. Thank you.
Just make sure that everyone's got enough time to note those contact details before we stop the share. Thank you very much indeed, Anna. And with 1,000 opportunities a day needed, there's clearly an awful lot of action that's needed as well, but some really clear calls to action and something that everyone can do. Everyone watching this can contribute to that program in some way. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. The chat is firing away as we speak. There are lots of points being made. If you've got questions that you'd like me to put to the panel in about 10 minutes time, please could you fire those through the Q&A section at the bottom of your screens, and I'll be really happy to pick those up in a few minutes. Just before we do that though, we're going to go to our final presentation. We're going to ask Simon to give us some evidence of the resilience of our communities with a description of the volunteer response that's been alluded to already over the last few months. Simon, I'll hand over to you.
Toby, are you going to run my slides?
I am happy to find your slides for you. Yeah.
Super. So while you find those, good morning here from Tring, and thank you for listening to me in what's actually a very unusual year for us here in Hertfordshire. And I want to spend just a little bit of time looking at what we've learned about volunteering and the role of the voluntary sector during COVID-19. So let's move on to that first slide, Toby. So a little bit about where we were before this. Traditionally, competition between charities led us to limited funds, and that meant bid writers undervalued the true cost of running charities, artificially deflating the cost of overheads and competing for contracts. Charities like public sector authorities and businesses have overheads, and whilst they can be lower than more competitive perhaps than other sectors, they're still a major factor in how we run our business and making sure that our charities are compliant and safe. So funders have had to, in order to cope with that, funders have offered us lower overhead costs. And sometimes I've seen funders offering as low as 7%, which just comes nowhere near to covering our costs. And also, there's a tendency for funders to want something different every time. So to win grants, charities try to be all things to all people and consistently change. And where projects will benefit from continuity and extension because they work, funding's harder to get. So as a result of that constant change, charities have tended to chase the money rather than be able to spend the time and develop their services to become increasingly proficient. So working in isolation and competing charities has caused us to lose income. But then in March, COVID hit, and overnight the sector had to go work from home, yet address the greatest need for support within a generation. And here in Hertfordshire, the community rose to that challenge. So we all came together, cross-sector, coordinated by Herts County Council, hand in hand with the voluntary sector to form Operation Sustain. And this was probably the first time that key players from voluntary sector met with the County Council, the CCGs and boroughs to talk about how we work together to meet the specific needs of the community on a frequent basis and working towards this common goal. And immediately, volunteer centres around the county came together with Team Herts to help mobilise those people who wanted to help. Within weeks, over 10,000 people had volunteered through the hashtag Team Herts campaign and through the volunteer centres that are across the county. Now, to put that into perspective, that's around 3 years' work that needed to be dealt with in a matter of 6 weeks or so. And in addition, some people have volunteered through other routes like the Good Sam app and the mutual aid groups that popped up across the county. As CVSs, we started to reach out to those groups, trying to help keep the community as safe as possible by checking out the people that stepped forward. So reflecting back on our experiences and the cooperation rather than the competition, we led to some wonderful results. And a bit, David mentioned some of these earlier, but just to reiterate that point, over 10,000 people stepped up to be counted. 5,000 of those were deployed across the county to work on things like Mundell's and food delivery in Hills, and many more were allocated to local charities. Now, it's worth knowing that typically a dropout rate of volunteers is around 25%. So when you see those 10,000 names, the best we would expect under normal circumstances is 7,500. In reality, the volunteer centres vetted and safely deployed over 6,000 volunteers, which, given that was done with no additional staff, given that it was 3 years' work, and given it was delivered in a matter of months, is an absolutely incredible feat for volunteers across the county. If we look at the next slide, you can see that some of the outputs that the volunteers delivered, 250,000 hot meals were delivered by Hulls. And the team of Herts County Council staff and volunteers at Mundell's packaged 110,000 food parcels and sent them out to vulnerable residents, with another 11,000 sent through distribution centres. People were helped with things like befriending and dog walking, providing them help with financial support and their mental health. And one of the very positive outcomes that came from this is the cooperation between charities and the formation of groups like the Hertfordshire Economic Recovery Team, Herts, 24/7 crisis line for mental health. And for us at Community Action Decorum and the other CVSs, the Community Help Hertfordshire initiative, which for the first time brings together CVSs from across Hertfordshire to work to address communities' needs. It's a collaboration between the CVSs, County Council, all of the borough councils and the 2 CCGs to provide a service that improves the lives of vulnerable people. We've already got 2 contracts there, and we're delivering to try and get 2 more. So looking at the outcomes from that on the next slide, we can see the benefits of cooperation. Actually, the future of our sector lies, I would argue, in cooperation rather than competition. Cooperative approaches get the best from all organisations, and the beneficiaries get the best support from people who know what they're doing. So we need to trust one another, and through trusting one another, able to signpost vulnerable and marginalised residents to highly skilled and highly trained volunteers who offer an excellent service in an economic way that makes a difference to the lives of people in Hertfordshire. And this is possible because the partnerships between Hearts Help and CVS's allow us to have a coordinated response across the sector. The advantage of this way of working is it allows for that local delivery, drawing on our knowledge, and with thanks to Operation Sustain, gives us a clear Hertfordshire focus. So local delivery, local knowledge, but county focus. Let's have a look at some of the impacts of on volunteering, because some of the things that came out were interesting. So let's consider generation theory, and I could talk about this for hours. I won't, but I could talk about this for hours. But if we think about generations that volunteer, traditionally, our volunteers tend to come from the silent generation or boomers, those born before 1970 broadly. Very few of our volunteers came from Generation X or millennials. But during lockdown, the boomers and silent generation were not able to help because they were the ones who were isolating and needed the help. So we had 10,000 people step forward who were Generation X or millennials, people that would not traditionally volunteer. And many of the people we processed in our volunteer centre were first-time volunteers, gaining a positive experience thanks to COVID. If we look as well at the volunteers that came forward, we had more professionals than normal, and it was disproportionately high. That meant for community action decorum, it was great. We were able to refer people into trustee roles, which normally were very hard to fill. But that's partly, I think, down to the furlough scheme and for people working from home, saving their commuting time and having more flexibility in their days. So professionals who had not had time to step forward came forward to help. So we're challenging the existing perceptions about our volunteer motivations. So if we move on to the next slide, what we found is that in addition to those traditional key volunteers that we're used to seeing, and they volunteer every day and have done regularly for many years, and those who step forward to do one small specific thing, for example, the fantastic work that Sir Tom Moore did raising money for the NHS as a one-off. We actually now see lots of people who came forward just for a shorter period, so longer than a single event, but not wishing to commit to a long-term thing. These episodic volunteers came forward because they were personally motivated to do so, and because the social norms in Hertfordshire had changed to a point at which it made it acceptable to volunteer. As a result of that, they gained some satisfaction from their volunteering, and they started to perceive the value of what they were doing. Now, if we want to maximise a future of volunteering throughout Hertfordshire, we need to convert these episodic volunteers into long-term key volunteers. And that's done through recognition, through thanks, reminding them of the satisfaction they felt, and maximising their value proposition so that we make it socially normal to volunteer in our county. And if we can convert new groups into volunteers, we end up with a long-term legacy for volunteering in Hertfordshire. So looking at that legacy, I put out a paper earlier this year, and it's been well accepted by the County Council and Borough. So I'm not going to go into these outcomes now. And I'm really grateful that you read it and accepted those thoughts. But more volunteers is not just about being positive for the volunteer sector. It also provides us an economic way to meet volunteer needs and provides them with health benefits, which saves money elsewhere. So if we look at our challenges for the future, well, we need a grown-up discussion about with our funders about overheads. Making us to compete has driven that value down. And we've supplemented your grants and commissions for years with our locally raised funds and income from activities. So we can run our offices, buy our stationery and provide you with safe professional services. But COVID has hit these unrestricted funds hard. There is a risk that money will be in place to deliver commissions, but the infrastructure to run the business of charities is not going to be there, and the failing gap won't be able to be closed. In Decorum yesterday, 5 out of 6 charities I was speaking to expressed concerns over unrestricted funds being so badly hit that it could impact on their ability to deliver fully funded contracts. And the 6th charity didn't have that problem because they didn't use that model. All charities are coping with this by drawing on reserves. And whilst that's what reserves are there for, sadly, it's a fixed pot, so it can't continue indefinitely. So what's our ask? Well, if we move on to the next slide, Toby, what you can see are the things we could do with from you. What can statutory do for the voluntary sector? Well, first of all, volunteers and amateurs are not the same. And volunteering does not mean cost-free. Voluntary sector organisations are run by professionals, and they have shown already how much they have to offer. So we need to plan together, bring us to the table earlier to discuss how we find common solutions in partnership for Hertfordshire residents that are built on mutual trust, built on alliances, and are equal and respectful to build on our expertise and avoid duplication of services. Give us fair funding offers that allow for true costs that are still be lower than the private sector, and offer us long-term agreements that allow us to keep our staff engaged longer and retain their experience. And while you're at it, if you can avoid innovation for some of those projects, that's great, because it allows us to develop some of the good work that should continue. And our volunteer experience suggests that employee-supported volunteering works really well for Generation X and millennial volunteers. So please support corporate social responsibility and reward those businesses who allow their staff to make a difference to community. And finally, thank you. We're far closer as sectors today than we've ever been. So we need to work across our sectors to provide local solutions that are based on a local knowledge, but with a Hertfordshire focus. Thanks, Toby.
Apologies for flicking through your slides slightly suddenly at the end there, Simon, but thank you for a fantastic presentation, and how interesting it is to get a sort of understanding of the people who are volunteering during this time. And that's something that's really new to me, and some numbers really sort of sprang out of that, particularly that in dealing with 74,000 calls, you were achieving a 95% excellent rating, which really speaks to the kind of cohesiveness of the service that you're providing, despite absorbing 10,000 volunteer applications in a short period of time. It really, it's an incredible result there. But also, of course, of great concern that 5 out of 6 of the charity's services are under threat due to costs, and that's clearly very worrying. But something that something might be able to be done about, given the sorts of measures that government are considering now, and the way that we're all responding to the understanding that this COVID pandemic is ongoing and enduring and is not going to be over by Christmas. That's a brilliant set of presentations, panel. Thank you very much indeed. Audience, we're coming to you now. It's your turn to put your questions to our panel and ask them directly what sort of things you're most concerned with. We're getting a lot that are coming through the chat section, which I will do my best to scroll through and pick out from. But there's one question coming through on the Q&A from Annie Fitzgerald about how we keep our staff and clients safe without testing. I don't know, does anyone in the panel want to pick up on the sort of testing issue? David, is there a sort of is there a program that you've got sight of that you've got some sort of clarity over with track and test?
So so there are a number of testing facilities in Hertfordshire. So we have the so-called Pillar 1 testing, which happens essentially within the National Health Service. And then the Pillar 2 testing is made up of a permanent site, which is a regional site that is at Tesco's headquarters in Shire Park in Welwyn Garden City. And then there are a series of 2-day-a-week sites, one in Hemel, one in Watford, and then at County Hall, which operate essentially 2 days a week that people can use. And then we've just added 2 more of these mobile sites, one in Boreham Wood and one at the university. So those, clearly there have been problems with the national system of going online in order to get your tests. But when you do go online and the system is allocating properly, those are the sites to which you will go and to which you'll be directed. There is undoubtedly a dilemma nationally about the extent to which the testing is run centrally versus it being run more locally. And our Director of Public Health, Jim McManus, has been a very strong advocate for having more local control of the testing that's going on. But we are well provided for. Clearly behind the scenes on the national system, there are issues in terms of the IT, and there are issues in terms of the capacity at the so-called lighthouse labs, which do the processing. But I've no concern, I've got no real concerns about the front end and the ability to cope with demand at the front end across Hertfordshire.
Lovely, thank you, David. And the rest of the panel, I'll be coming to you with some more questions shortly. So feel free to pick up on that issue if you'd like. Firstly, though, we're going to launch the polls so that we can find out a little bit about what the audience's views are on some of the issues that we've been discussing today. So I'm going to launch the first one now, just to ask everybody whether or not they've attended Hertfordshire Forward event before. So it's a nice, easy question to get you going. And while you're answering that, I'm going to go to Terry Doris, one of our viewers, who's got a question for Simon. Simon, should charities be considering any possibilities of reordering their funds to remove the impact of restrictive funds?
Well, thank you. Thanks, Terry. Absolutely. I think that's something that charities should be doing, and every charity that's got the ability to look at their finances with a good financial manager or a good treasurer should be doing so. I think the difficulty is a lot of the figures are specified in grants and contracts that say how much and what percentage of the money we are allowed to spend within our contract on overheads and those costs. And so when that's the bit that's been forced down, and it's been done out of competition, and it's worked relatively well actually in normal times. But the problem here is that we're not in normal times. And whilst government and contractors and funders in general have been really generous and have been happy to honour the grants that they've offered, the bit that we then lose is the overheads, and we can make some savings perhaps on overheads, but not to meet the gap. And it's the bit that we get from the activity costs and return from those services and from fundraising events that really just supported that, and that's the bit that's been hit sadly.
Fantastic. Okay, David, you'd like to come in on that?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to thank Terry Doris for that question. Terry is my cabinet member responsible for localism, and if there are people on the call, partners who want to talk about some of the things that Simon was talking about and some of the issues raised by Simon in his outstanding analysis, Toby, I shared your perspective. It's great to receive that sort of analysis and understanding of the sector. Then Terry Doris is your man, and I'm sure many people on this webcast know him. But if there are issues, whether it's CVS's, charities or whatever, that you want a gateway into HCC, then Terry Doris is your man.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks a lot, David, and thank you, Terry. Our audience, about a quarter of our audience hasn't attended one of these events before. That compares to about a third last year. So I don't know, that maybe is indicating a bit of penetration on the part of Hertfordshire Forward. Worryingly, one of our audience isn't sure about whether they've attended one or not. I'm not sure whether that speaks more to them or to the organisation. I'll leave that one hanging. Okay, I had a question. I'm just going to run a few little questions through the panel in order to sort of refresh our memories of what we've heard over the last 45 minutes. David, you talked about a £5 billion fall in GVA. Are there any sectors in Hertfordshire that are going against the grain? Are there any sectors that are actually flourishing in these conditions, or at least progressing?
Well, we believe that the life sciences sector, which is particularly based in Stevenage, but then also Ware and Hoddesdon as well, where we've got some very big players. That's a sector that seems to be going from strength to strength. And Linda and I know Sally Ann Forsyth, who runs the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst. And basically, she can't find enough space at the moment in order to deal with the startups and the build outs and the build ons that she's dealing with. So I think life sciences is doing very well. I think that film and media in the southwest of the county, that will bounce back very quickly. That will be quite a really strong V. It is to a degree reliant on international travel. EastEnders fans will be pleased to have seen that EastEnders is back in production again, and obviously that comes from Boreham Wood. But that's a sector I would expect to see bounce back very quickly. And one of the big investments that we're really so pleased about and proud about is that Comcast, who now owns Sky and other brands in the States, are investing some $2+ billion in a new studio complex in Boreham Wood, and that is, as far as I'm aware, pressing on regardless.
That's fantastic. And can we take that into your work, Anna? I'd be interested to know if you're able to give us a little information about what sectors your apprentices are working in, and what that might mean for the outlook of those apprenticeships, given what David said about the sort of growth sectors. Sure. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to ping up a couple more polls.
That's fine. I mean, we are really lucky in Hertfordshire. We've got a brilliant provider base. So we've got brilliant colleges, our university, and all of our independent training providers who cover a vast range of apprenticeships at all levels, from level 2 through to level 7. So for anyone who doesn't know, level 7 would be equivalent to a master's degree. So we really have got that exceptional range. And then all of the different subjects or areas, apprenticeship standards they're now called, that sit within it. So absolutely anything from traditional areas that you might expect with apprenticeships, like hairdressing, any of the construction trades, all the way through to animal care. I mean, obviously we're seeing a huge boost in nursing at the moment because of the government's announcement around the registered nurse degree apprenticeship. Some of the areas that we're seeing the vacancies coming out for at the moment, or over the past few weeks, I'm a bit of a data geek, so I like looking at this data. We've been seeing quite a few in educational establishments, so kind of teaching assistants, early years educators, nursery type roles. We've also seen a lot of digital, and we've seen quite a bit of accountancy and finance related. So alongside that, we've obviously seen any kind of careers or sector areas that would be linked to the areas of growth. So working in healthcare, for example, but also in science, scientific research, and laboratory technicians. Those are some of the areas that are emerging, but I think what we will start to see now that people are becoming more certain around the apprenticeship incentives, we're hoping that we're going to start to see a bit more diversification and other job roles coming forward. And I've picked up a question around Kickstart, and Kickstart is a really interesting one because some people are saying, well, isn't it going to displace apprenticeships? And then if you listen to ministers and MPs, they will say, well, no, it's an entirely different offer. I think speaking on behalf of providers, I manage the Hearts and Beds provider network, so I talk to providers all the time, and they will say, I think we're yet to see the impact of it. Kickstart is a really excellent scheme, actually. It's designed for individuals who are claiming universal credit, who are aged 16 to 24, and employers can create a placement, and it will be fully funded by the government. So they will receive money to pay for the salary costs for 25 hours a week at the relevant minimum wage for that young person. They will also get their national insurance contributions paid, the pension contributions paid if eligible, and also £1,500 towards startup costs and equipment, PPE, but it will also pay for training for that young person. It's a 6-month commitment, but if you don't want to offer that young person a position after the 6 months, then you can release them. Hopefully they will have gained some skills to be able to move on, hopefully into an apprenticeship, and then you can take on another young person. So it's really worth looking into. I've put some information in the Q&A. Someone was saying, what if we've got less than 30 placements? Where do we go? A number of organisations, you won't be surprised because Hertfordshire are brilliant at this, but a number of people have put themselves forward and said, we will coordinate those employers with less than 30 placements. So you have to go through an intermediary. A number of organisations are offering it, Chambers, Wenter and other businesses. So they will help to coordinate any employers like myself who want to offer a placement but can't offer 30 or more. Then you can collaborate with others.
Great stuff, Anna. Thanks a lot. And we've had a couple of polls while you've been talking, and one was quite interesting sort of findings. One of them was, as I'd expect, almost all of our audience don't believe that apprenticeships are most suited to low or unskilled people. But about half our audience don't feel that they're well informed about apprenticeships and the latest developments. And hopefully we're addressing that issue right now. But it relates to a question from Owen Matley through the chat, who talks about your fantastic presentations, Anna, but also about the attitudes about from some employers about the value of apprenticeships, i.e. only those who don't go on to other types of education or training, as you alluded to in your presentation. Further to your great material, are there any top tips? Do you have any top tips to help celebrate the fantastic opportunities that modern apprenticeships can provide?
Yes, well, first of all, we need to drop the word modern. I think that when they modernised apprenticeships, ironically, they dropped the word modern. So we now just call them apprenticeships. I think a lot of this is about leading by example. I'm really pushing for our Hertfordshire campaign to be able to show local businesses who are recruiting right now and taking on individuals as apprentices, starting them in really tough conditions. You know, some apprentices are being onboarded from home and aren't even going into the workplace to meet with colleagues. But this is where our training providers come into their own, because they're brilliant and they will work tirelessly with employers and those individuals to make sure that that happens. I think there's always going to be some disbelievers, aren't there? Employers and others who perhaps don't realise the benefits, but I think let's focus on the good stuff. There are lots of businesses who do realise the opportunities and are really keen to progress. And if I can just pick up on parents and carers, because just before lockdown, I ran a survey amongst parents and carers in Hertfordshire. Now, I've done this with Hertfordshire Let for 2 consecutive years. And for the 2 years running, we have had a response rate of 74% of parents and carers saying they would recommend an apprenticeship for their child. We have never had a situation like that in Hertfordshire for 2 years running as well, where parents, and you know what our parents are like, and they have high expectations of the education system, and we're battling against this kind of expectation that people had to go to university, you know, like I had. So to have 74% for 2 years saying that they would recommend it for their child is significant. We've got to try and maintain that level of confidence. So we've got to be putting stories out there that are showing the good news and kind of encouraging people to do more. And of course, lots of parents are in that position as employers as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Anna. Thanks very much indeed. Linda, can I turn to your work on community reassurance and ask you about Do you have any fears that there are groups out there that we're still not reaching, that we're still not aware of, that are a bit isolated and disadvantaged as a result of COVID-19? Are you confident that you're now reaching everyone that needs to be reached?
Well, the hard to reach are always the hard to reach. But before I answer that, I know David wanted to come in on the apprenticeship scheme because I could see him waving. So would you mind if I defer to him to begin with, and then I can come back?
Yes, well, I was just going to come in very quickly. And I must highlight that I am a governor at the University of Hertfordshire, and one of the things that the university does focus on is its degree level schemes. But yeah, I mean, Anna covered it off. Both parents and our schools tend to view the academic route and going straight into university. And dare I say it, some of our schools are so good that the head teacher's ambition is to get their pupils into Russell Group universities as well. So there's a challenge here in terms of making people more aware about the opportunities, about the benefits, particularly of a graduate level apprenticeship and the sort of apprenticeships that, for instance, MBDA and Stevenage have put in place with the University of Hertfordshire.
Yeah, great stuff, David. I do apologise. You were covered by a poll briefly, so I need to get a bigger screen for all these gadgets and gizmos that are ongoing. Linda, let's turn back to community reassurance.
It depends upon your definition of a poll, really, aren't there? There are several types of polls around these days. Yes, of course, as I said, hard to reach are always hard to reach, but I think hopefully by doing these sort of webinars, by talking to a lot of people, if people do come up with, well, you haven't thought about this, you haven't thought about that, then, you know, please let us know. And I noticed in the chat there was a comment about faith groups. Well, we do work closely with the interfaith group, which is organised through County Council, and also Maurice Bright has done a lot of work with Jewish communities. We've worked with Watford through the Muslim communities. So I think it is one of those, we do our best to get to people, but if you know that there are ones out there that we are not getting to, we should be talking with, then get in touch.
Yeah, it's interesting. Almost half our audience believe that the measures that were introduced this week, or at least that were flagged this week by the Prime Minister, don't go far enough. So if that's the case, then I imagine that your communities are going to need even more reassurance about the measures to come. And we've also got a question in here from Kate. I think it's pronounced Belinis. Apologies, Kate, if I've got that wrong. Once we've reached out to BAME people and groups, how can we sustain and maintain those connections? Linda, what's your experience with the cell in that way? And there are different levels of engagement, and Kate is keen to be involved in those conversations, i.e. at CDA Hearts.
No, Kate came and presented to one of our very early cell group meetings. So thank you, Kate, for raising this. I think, again, what we've been trying to do is we've done a lot of work with the BAME community and taxi drivers. So that's a very specific one. One of the comments that came back through the questionnaire from the CIA was lunch clubs for those in the Afro-Caribbean and Caribbean communities, you know, and so we need to see how we may be able to open those up again because they've had to close. And it's looking at perhaps little small steps that work very specifically for very particular areas. You know, lunch clubs are very important for a lot of people across the area. Are they something that we can't do anymore? You know, it could have been possible that we could have held them in a garden, but even that may not be possible, particularly going into the winter. So it's going to be more challenging in the coming months with the weather changing. And not being able to get out. You know, what should we also be doing in terms of fuel poverty? You know, where are the grants? How do we get those out there? How do we make sure that people who are entitled to benefits of whatever kind know what they should be applying for? And one thing we were talking about yesterday from the analysis that Faz has done at County Council is there is a new cohort out there of mostly men who have always been working, who have always been used to providing, they now may not have a job. So how do we help them recognise that it is not it's not a stigma to apply for benefits that actually are important to keep you going and your family going. And we will be talking with suicide people, because that is a growing area at the moment, men who are committed suicide. So it's something that we do have to take on board.
Yeah, my understanding of that, Linda, is that that tends to happen when people are disconnected, when they're isolated and they don't have a way of expressing the depression and the feelings that they have.
And it comes back down to men recognizing that mental health is not something you should be ashamed of. It's something actually to say, we've all had days over the last 6 months where you think, do I really want to get up out of this duvet?
I'm trying hard to remember a day when I didn't think that, Linda. But it really underscores the importance of the work that you're doing to reach out to these groups. And David, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I mean, Toby, the pandemic has been such an eye opener for us in so many ways, and of course it's coincided with what happened in the US. Owen Mackley, the County Council's chief executive. We were hesitant about when to launch our diversity and equality strategy, or our refreshed strategy, but we decided to go ahead and we did it during lockdown. And one of the things he did early on was bring in well over 100 of our BAME employees who work for the County Council. And it's been a huge eye opener for us. Candidly, our senior management team, the senior councillors at the County Council, are not a very diverse group. We've gathered some real insights. It's become a bit of a cliche, but this notion of people's lived experiences is a huge eye opener. And in some respects, I'm delighted that the third of these webinars will address this. And then, as Linda said, we've had some exceptional routes in to the community, to some faith communities as we've gone through COVID. And I'd particularly highlight Councillor Asif Khan in Watford, and his links with the Muslim community in Watford have been invaluable. And then people like Maurice Bright and Rabbi Alan Clancy in Hertfordshire have been really helpful as well. But certainly for my takeout from this is, what is people's lived experiences, and it isn't the same as mine.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. Thank you also to my colleague Suma Para, who's putting lots of questions through the chat to the audience, and there's loads of responses to that we're going to be gathering after this session and playing back to you all. Before we get to the next question, though, I'd like to turn to Simon, and in amongst the sort of rich detail that you gave us about your volunteer force, Simon, I'd be really interested to know what the causes were that were most popular, that most people were sort of keen to support and get involved in, and whether there are any areas or causes that are more in need of volunteers, that are perhaps missing out or are less popular. And perhaps before getting onto that, you'd like to respond to any of the threads that have come forward during the conversation so far.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I'll struggle to remember your question when I get there. I did occur to there's 5 white faces here talking about racial equality, and it's very odd that we're in a county that is stronger for its diversity, and the people that we have in this county provide such a beautiful mix of experience, that's lived experience, as David says. And I think we have to commit as leaders of that community to finding ways to helping get to a point where we raise the profile of people from all different racial backgrounds and all different diverse backgrounds, so that actually when we have a panel like this, it's not that we're choosing people to be on it because of their race, but we would naturally, when we chose the people we had, have a mix. And it's just as a thought, and I think volunteering is helping that. We're working consistently to try and bring more and more people through and make volunteering open to everybody. And I was very interested to hear what Linda was saying about men and their issues. And we have a number of projects that work with men that are retired, for example, or widowed. And one of the things that they find is, for us as men, it's really difficult to talk eye to eye. It's not something we do naturally. We clam up, but we'll talk shoulder to shoulder. So we have a project, Repair Sheds, which gets men working on projects for local charities. They stand next to each other and they chat and they get their problems out. And in doing that, we start to give them purpose and meaning and address those and tackle some mental health issues. So those are the bits I was going to come back on. I think you were asking me about where people volunteered and what they wanted to do. And we found that a lot of people who came forward very quickly because they saw there was a need to support their community. And they wanted to do anything they could to help the people around them that they could see already were struggling. So for some, the things that we got most people doing was delivering food and addressing the need, particularly of those who were isolating and the elderly. But the other thing that we did, and it perhaps plays back to Linda's point, is we provided services that were there in the background for people who were anxious. So there were a lot of people that I spoke to who were sitting there in their homes. They didn't want to go out, they didn't want to go shopping, but they either couldn't work online shopping tools or couldn't get slots because they weren't shielding. And for them, we offered services where we would go and do that shopping for them. Now, the uptake of that was great, but the potential uptake was far greater. The ones that didn't take up those slots or our slots benefited from the fact that they knew that they would get food, and that helped them overcome the anxiety of what would happen. And we had some ex-Hertfordshire residents who called in to say their parents were still living in their county. Could we help them? Because one guy in Leicester was saying his 92-year-old mother who lived in Berkhamsted couldn't get out. What could he do? Because he couldn't get here to help them. And that, again, it was all about addressing anxiety and supporting people just to know that somebody had got their back. So I think what most people in the community wanted to do was be a good neighbour and to know that they got the back of the people who needed it at that time. And that's why it was an episodic occurrence rather than people wanting to volunteer long term.
Fantastic, Simon. Thank you very much indeed for that. I see that a member of our audience, Tony Medhurst, has raised a hand. And Tony, I'm very sorry, but we're not enabling other people to take the stage today. We're here to hear from our fantastic panel. But if you do have a question you'd like us to put to the panel, please just ship it through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure that happens. However, we're not going to be able to make sure that that happens right now. It'll happen after this event by email, and we'll make sure that their responses come back to you. But I'm afraid we've run out of time. An hour and a half has flown by in the excellent company and hearing about the excellent work of our panel today. We've heard about some shocking things, and it's always, as being involved in these events in these times, we're always treading a fine line between talking about the sort of doom and gloom nature of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, and it's very hard to avoid that. I mean, it is reality, and it's a stark reality for many of our residents and colleagues and friends. On the other hand, it's not a reality that's without good news. And we've got a message in on the chat that 1,000 people have returned to work at Warner Brothers, and there is other good news. There are sectors that are flourishing. There are sectors that are still growing in our economy. So there is some hope for recovery, provided that we're working together to secure that. We're losing 100,000 jobs. We've got a threefold rise in unemployment claimants in some areas. These facts can't be avoided, but we've got a need for 1,000 opportunities a day to be created for our apprentices. But we've got some clear calls to action on that. We've got some clear strategies. There's work that all of us can be doing to contribute to providing those. We've got a 95% excellent rating on our volunteer response to residents' needs. So there are excellent services being provided. There are 10,000 people that put up their hands straight away and responded and said that they could help. 5 out of 6 of our charities are in danger of not being able to provide their services due to rising costs, but there's something that we can do about that too. So it's clear, and it's reinforced by what we've heard today, I feel, that COVID-19 is having a lasting impact on our communities for the short, for the medium, for the long term. But it's also clear that Hertfordshire's leaders and yourselves out there, viewers, are collaborating to ensure that the county can emerge as healthier and more sustainable. And what we've heard today about apprenticeships, about the fantastic volunteer force that Hertfordshire can call upon, about the community reassurance work, and about the work that the county is doing to reduce infections and spread. These are many of the ingredients needed to support recovery, and they're in place, and all partners can contribute to that. And speaking of contributions, what a fantastic contribution from our whole panel. How could we not be roused into a spirit of partnership after hearing these presentations today? If we're all together now in a single room, we might even be holding hands to show our commitment to collaboration at this moment, but we're not. And our only return for our panelists, for their inspiration and for enthusiasts, all we can offer them is virtual applause from afar. But nevertheless, however remotely, I'm sure you'll be joining me across Hertfordshire in thanking David Williams, the leader of Hertfordshire County Council, Linda Hazy, the leader of East Hertfordshire District Council, Anna Morrison, CBE, Director of Amazing Apprenticeships, and Simon Alton, Chief Executive Officer of Community Action Decorum. And thanks, of course, to you out there, probing and challenging collegiate audience for contributing so much to the discussion at the end of the session. It's a discussion that will continue. As I said, your unanswered questions will be tackled by our panel via email, and the responses will be circulated through Hertfordshire Forward. And there's also another opportunity for you to engage with Hertfordshire Forward and register on their website for the next webinar in this series on the 21st of October, when we'll be discussing sustainability and delivering a cleaner, greener and more environmentally sustainable Hertfordshire. Until then, from our panel, from me and from everyone at Hertfordshire Forward, good afternoon.
Thanks, Toby.